So I'm Annemarie. I'm a basket maker. I live in Lewis. I've been a basket maker, or I've been making probably for about 8 to 10 years. Before that, I didn't make anything at all or have any form of art background at all. The thing that I relate my making to mostly is, as a child, I used to really want to live underwater. I spent most of my childhood just wishing I was the man from Atlantis. And I spent a huge amount of my childhood in a swimming pool or in the river, and spent hours and hours swimming. And I noticed the first time when I made a basket, something came back to me, a memory that came back to me, which was when I was younger and I used to swim. As I was falling asleep in the evenings, I'd feel myself swimming. And quite often when I dreamt when I was going kind of up to the town or up to the shop or something, I was swimming there. And then when I started making baskets, suddenly that feeling, that rhythm came back to me. It's a very peculiar thing that maybe someday somebody will explain to me with some theory. So it's an interesting place to be now, having not really had an art background, but I very much relate the work that I do to my body and to relating, to a kind of a physical notion. I started, first of all, I did a one-day course about 10 years ago in basket making, and I just was like, oh, I want to do that. I want to do that. And my husband proclaimed at the time that I was much nicer to be around when I was making baskets, and when I'd started this work. So compared to how I was when I was doing my other work. So I was given full license to go ahead and make and to become a maker, and that was a really fantastic point, I suppose, to discover. So do I need some flag? So I spent 5 years. I spent 3 years, first of all, just doing little bits of basket making, learning about willow growing, learning about living willow sculpture, getting really, really excited, and I had small children at the time. And so I didn't have a great deal of time available. And there wasn't really any basket making available locally. There was somebody in West Sussex who I occasionally went to. And I just felt this huge thirst, that a real hunger for this thing I wanted to do. And eventually then I found a course in London, and I went there part-time for 5 years, learning lots of different techniques. It was very technical based course. And found I was pretty proficient. I picked up things easily, and it was very much about learning about the material and the relationship with the material. I learned lots and lots of different techniques. I learned to work with lots and lots of different materials, but willow was always the thing that I came back to. The sense that it was a natural material, it was native, it would have been grown all over the country. There's a history of it all over Britain, all over Europe. And I started to get more involved with, I suppose, finding out about what had happened locally, where it would have been grown locally, and getting quite excited about all of that. Do you want to? So this is me in my workshop. I think one of the things that I found as well is that I wanted to work outdoors, and I'm at my best when I'm muddy and slightly damp, and I'm just and and that's one thing about this rain that's gone on and on. I planted quite a big willow bed this year, and when I planted it, it was roasting. It was at the end of March, and the little willow cuttings were almost, cooking in the sun as I was putting them in the ground. And then, so I've been very, very thankful for all the rain. But I'm probably one of the few people. but that's enough now. That's enough. Yeah. So I'm quite. I have been living in Lewis, in an area where I've got a really good, really nice access to the downs. So I feel like I've been more and more influenced by the lines of the landscape. And also I walk quite a lot, so I've ended up, I suppose, just intrigued by the people who've walked there before me, intrigued by the crafts, intrigued by all the farming, everything connected with the land around there, and I feel like this has then influenced my work. So the lines from the downs have kind of entered my work. I've started during my training. I experimented quite a lot. I started experimenting with the materials that I found locally. So I gathered lots of chalk and crushed it and combined this with willow. I started working with lots of different woods and seeing what I could, what materials I could combine together. I started working with, one of the main materials that I worked with as well during my training was rush. So this is club rush. And I suppose have been interested in, it's a very, very old traditional material. It was used for lots of matting, it was used for beds, it was used for door covers. So in times when there weren't windows and there wasn't much softness and comfort, it was one of the main materials that was used. And this I've used a corn dolly plaiting technique, so just experimenting with using it in a different way. This is an image of some of just a sketch, a plan view of some of the larger work that I've done. This was a living willow piece for Wakehurst Place. So again, these kind of the designs that I was working on have had a lot of curves and a lot of movement. And it's interesting because when I started, my very first pieces of work when I got my hands on willow were, I did a one-day basket making course, and then after that I did living willow. So I started, I suppose, sketching or drawing with big pieces. So I was using pieces that were 3 meters long and planting them in the ground and moving them around and standing back and thinking, oh, that's a bit wonky, and then putting my whole body on it and pushing it and realizing, oh, I can draw with my body. I can get my body to help to push things into shape, and I've really enjoyed that relationship. So this is an image of just some of the weaves, and you can see there's cuttings of willow. There's very tall rods, but then there's little cuttings as well, so there's lots of growth from the bottom. So these structures are structures that grow. I mean, I'm assuming people know, but they are planted about a foot into the ground. They're woven together and then they grow. So there's a green canopy, and that's one of the pieces when they were finished. Okay. So this is work that I've done this year. I planted for the first time. I planted my own willow bed, which is about half an hour north of Lewis. I've been really interested in all the time that I've been making in the materials and where they come from, and most of the willow that I get is from Somerset, and it's sprayed and it's really mass produced, and it's very difficult to get anything else. And over, all over the country, every area would have had willows that grow well in that area. Now there's one willow available commercially, and that's the willow that grows well on the Somerset levels. And there's hundreds of different varieties that are just disappearing. They're just not grown. There aren't commercial growers, so they've just disappeared. So the osier beds that were in each area are disappearing, and I feel like I've got an opportunity to rework and recreate what would have been in the area where I live. I've done quite a lot of research into what was grown around the Lewis area, and what I'm hoping to do over time is to replant those, because they would be, I feel like they're really, really important. They're from a lineage. They would have been passed on, they would have been cut, somebody 200 years ago would have taken a cutting, walked a mile down the road, stuck it in the ground, started again. Maybe 40 years later, the cutting would have been taken from there and put somewhere else. So there's a lineage in this place, and I suppose I feel concerned that it's disappearing. They're just going to vanish, So I've planted about 40 different varieties in Horham, just north of Lewis, and that's my son examining the green fly that they're taking over the tops of them. Okay. So what I feel about planting the willow and understanding what's been happening locally, or what's happened historically locally, is it's given me a really great sense of belonging, to feel that I've looked at all the old Ordnance Survey maps and found where the old osier beds were, and I've walked out, I've fallen in ditches, I've climbed through brambles to find remnants of where people would have been out cutting and growing and cutting, and it would have been of great commercial value a long time ago.
So where did you get your cuttings from?
I've collected them from other growers, but I know some of them are ones that were grown locally. So yeah, but I have another ongoing project with a bed that is in Lewis, which is completely overgrown, which I'm hoping to replant as well. So yeah, it's very exciting. And some of them have come from Ireland as well. Some of them have come from France, but they're ones that have been shared between basket makers and a network of basket makers for a long time. Yeah, so it's very exciting. So as part of this kind of understanding the growing, specifically the willow, that took me on to looking at coppice wood, because obviously the southeast is covered in coppice, which was mostly for the iron ore industry, so it was for smelting. And I realised there's loads of people around who are chair makers and spoon carvers, and they're hidden away in little coppices all around. So I decided I was going to find out a little bit more about that, because I liked the idea of being able to combine wood and willow. Okay, can you skip on again? So I got some funding last year to do some training, so to start learning about wood, which was a whole new set of skills. I had got to grips with one material and realised there was a whole new set of skills, a whole new set of tools I needed. So I set about mainly learning about wood, how to work with wood, how to split wood, how to steam and bend wood. But I did this in a very, in a really basic way in the woods. So if we just go through the next few pictures. So this is me learning to split some ash and to make some chair legs. So you can see in this as well, you can see the knots and you can see the curve, and each bit of wood is selected for a particular purpose. So the curve of these is used for the back legs of the chair. Okay. And this is the steaming device, which is very nice to use. Creates a nice atmosphere, nice smoky atmosphere. So what I did for any bit of the wood that I needed to bend, I needed to steam bend. It went in the bin for 2 hours, got kind of heated and cooked, and then I'd made a former, so I put it into a former and clamp it in there so it would keep its curve, and then I would take it out. So that's the chair that I made right at the beginning. Okay. And then I started to integrate what I'd learned there with willow and started to combine them together in baskets, I suppose more contemporary sculptural work. That one is about 3.5, 4 meters long, so it's all little jointed pieces. And then, some looking at some traditional work as well, a little bit more like European work, where in heavily forested areas, the skills of a basket maker and the skills of the woodworkers would be much more combined. We could go on to the next one. What all of this is a little bit of a shocking picture in comparison to all of that. I was saying to Caitlin earlier, I've got quite a lot of pictures of people in cardboard boxes. And it kind of relates to the sense of belonging that working with wood, working with willow, working on the local land has given to me. And the knowledge that I feel so connected, because when I go out, I'm spotting, oh look, there's willow, that could be an osier bed over there, there's a stream, there's this, there's that, oh, there's ash, that would be great to make a chair. And I feel like it's given me a whole new connection. And when I started doing this work, I was also doing some design work which was about shelters. And I started collecting lots of images of shelters and how people shelter themselves and how people protect themselves. And the cardboard box kept coming up for me as just this, devastating contrast of living in an urban environment where you are alone and you don't really have knowledge, you don't have those resources. And it's really, it's an image that keeps coming back. I did a lot of work looking at rain capes and shepherds. So in the past, shepherds would have gathered materials from around them and woven themselves capes or woven themselves little shelters. And it was I'm sure it was a very harsh life, but it was a choice and there was a knowledge there. And this keeps coming up for me, this aloneness. And I think it's interesting as well, we were talking about the person in the cardboard box actually as well being by the wall. That's just about the maximum amount of shelter that they could get. Okay. So the shelter and the elemental forces, so wind, rain, has been something that's influenced me and has become an inspiration. So vessels that I've made, I have worked with the idea of an element or a force working on them. And thought quite a lot about how we shelter, so how individuals shelter or how groups shelter. So quite a lot on the downs where you walk, you'll find places where the hawthorn is all blown together, where there's a copse, quite a few, and there's a beautiful shade made by the wind, and underneath all the sheep are all cuddled up, and there's lots of wool, an entanglement. So that's been one of the kind of inspirations about creating this and working with this. So these are images that have been playing out in my research and my inspiration over time. I started to see all over the downs, the way trees grow together. And it's become a kind of a language of, oh, there's another lot, oh, there's another lot, oh, look at all of them. And then coming into town, I started to notice, oh, look at all those people there, they're all over there doing a similar thing, and they're all leaning that way. And there's a kind of an interdependence. It's like there's lots of individuals, but then they've come together and they stand in a crowd together, and suddenly the individual is invisible, or nearly invisible, and there's an interdependence so that they almost act like one organism, so that the group becomes, I think it's you notice it more maybe with teenagers. You just see. So this is again just the way individual items or people can cluster together almost to be like one organism. That's been, one of the things I thought quite a lot about when making pieces for this. Okay. So that kind of covers the inspiration. And maybe I'll just talk a little bit about the material that I've used here. So obviously, what I've talked about so far is mostly to do with working with willow. When I was asked to put in a proposal here, and it was to relate to the two grid shell buildings, so the one at the Wealdon Downland in Singleton and at the Woodland Enterprise Centre in Clinwell. I was interested in working with a similar weave, and I was interested in working with a similar material because it was new and it was interesting. And when I cleave material, so when I've worked with wood and split material, it's very difficult to get long lengths. So the really exciting bit to this is that I could get infinitely long lengths to work with, which at the time was very, very attractive. And so we've had, I've got wood from a company called Inwood Developments in Whitesmith, and they, I can just talk you through the process. They get a plank of sweet chestnut. All along the plank there's lots of knots, a little bit like the wood here, you see. And if you were to bend the wood where the knots are, you get a snap. So it really wouldn't be particularly brilliant. So what they do is they mark out by eye with a fluorescent crayon. They mark out on the plank where all the knots are. Then that goes into a machine. The machine picks out all those knots and cuts sections away so they're discarded. And then it finger joins, so it essentially cuts a zigzag into the wood at both ends of short pieces of wood, and then they're glued together and clamped. So you can get, obviously you can just keep adding and adding and adding. And what I chose to work with is 6 metre lengths, so all the pieces that are there and here are 6 metre lengths of wood, and it's all from sweet chestnut coppice, which is grown in the southeast. And what the Woodland Enterprise Centre are trying to do is to promote the use of this as a building material, because it doesn't really have any commercial value, and there isn't a great deal of commercial use. There hasn't been, and I think it's increasing now. So I can just show you this process. We laid out on the floor in a circle. It's a very simple under-over pattern. The weave is actually pretty easy, isn't it, Anna? We've been teaching Anna tonight. We've been making you practice. Okay. So we can go through these fairly quickly. So there's the grid laid out, and then what we've done is we've tied, we've clamped it all the way around on the points of the triangles after lots of measuring and trying to get it exactly right. Then we've tied on two crossover points, hitched a rope up over a support up in the roof, and then you can flick through the next ones, hoisted it up. Okay. So that's basically how we've used gravity to make the structure, because if I was to obviously to try and lift the pieces up, there'd be so much strain, it wouldn't happen. And this method enabled us to make a piece. We probably had 3 people present for each one, but we could probably do it with 2, or I could at least set it up and have somebody there to work to help with the clamping. When I make a basket or do weaving normally, the elements that I'm working with are plugged into the ground or plugged into a basket, and the basket is weighted down. But with this, it's moving in space all the time. So we had to really try and brace to do any of the weaving. And each time that we wove one section, it affected everything else. So we put everything else. There's a kind of a twisting that happens as you make. So we'd weave one section and then undo the clamps and then weave the next section. So we kept on just working our way down till it became more like a basket shape. Okay. And we experimented a lot with trying to get a nice shape. At the beginning, it was, I felt like we needed to work quite safely because I didn't really know what the material was going to do. And actually, the first batch of material was beautiful. It worked really, really easily. The second batch of material came and worked completely differently. So somebody last week made a comment of saying, "Oh, it's so industrial, and how did you, it doesn't seem quite right to work with such an industrial material that just would do what you want it to do." And I'm like, it didn't do what I wanted it to do. It posed lots and lots of challenges. And I'm not completely clear with each of those what the problems were. I think with the first batch may have been greener, so it was a little bit more flexible. So it's actually possible for them to finger joint it and glue it while it's still green, which was a surprise to me. And obviously with the warmer weather it dries out a little bit more. I worked with different thicknesses, so as we lifted it up and it was weighted down, when I put more elements into it, it was too heavy and it caused snapping. So when one thing snaps, then there's this feeling of a slight emergency. Oh my God, what's the next weakest point? The next weakest point. So you're always working with the weakest part of it, and really having to anticipate where there might be a weakness or there might be an imbalance. So it was actually at times, some of the pieces made themselves almost, they were so easy, and then others were really tricky. So they're the first couple of pieces. Once we've made them, I started to think about how we would integrate them into the space and how we would work with this idea of them clustering and having a relationship with each other and a relationship in the space. So we had a little play with drawing lines from them. And what's interesting as well is when you have a long length of wood, you get a lovely sagging and dip, and gravity works on it. When you have a straight bit of wood, it doesn't really do anything. Or when you have a short bit of wood, it doesn't do the same thing. You can't draw a shorter line with that weight. There's been lots of little things along the way that we found work and don't work. So, I worked in a building in Lewis called the Foundry, which is this beautiful old foundry, and that's where we first started, and we experimented working on just different configurations of how the vessels would fit together. Okay. So that's just a close-up of some of the lines that we drew, and the shapes that are I suppose I'd almost call them fully resolved, where they go back into themselves. They obviously don't have any ties on them, they don't have any glue, they're just woven back into themselves, so the tension they hold all the tension themselves, and there is a lot of tension there. But they were particularly easy to draw lines from. It's quite interesting that I could just add a piece and go, oh yeah, that works. Whereas the ones that are open took a lot of work working out how you can draw a nice line from them. That was an interesting process. We had a little trial run of bringing them into Fabrica, and they were kind of dressed up like, one of them had like hankies on their heads, like they were coming to Brighton to the beach for the day. So we had a play with working with them in the space and feeling how they might relate to each other. And then finally we came and put all the pieces in place, and it's interesting, that one just landed there first time and it was taken care of. Things arrived in their places, and then so all of the pieces, this one, all of those were made in Lewis, and then this one was made here. So we put the rigging across the top of the table, and we made it here. I made this one with 10-metre lengths, so they spanned the full width between the columns and a little bit more. And we made them with sweet chestnuts that's twice the thickness of the other. It was very difficult really to know what thickness would work with that length, and of course how many elements. I think you're a structural engineer, are you? Good. Maybe we should have a conversation. Because I kept saying, oh, I need a structural engineer to tell me, to try and work this out. Obviously the weight of them when they are pulled up and then let down, it all seemed fine, and there was lots and lots of people volunteering here. We were being filmed. There was an audience of people up there, and there was a bang! And one of the main kind of central pieces had just... And we had that a few times with this. Well, no, we had it one main time right at the beginning, which was quite unpleasant, but it made me a little bit like this while we were making it. So the process of when we've got the whole thing woven, then with the other pieces, we've lowered it down and turned it on its side. and then turned it like that. But with this one, it felt like it was far too vulnerable to turn it on its side, because what they've tended to do when they're a circle and we put them on their side, when they've been heavier, they've kind of flattened into a kind of an oval. So my huge worry with this was that we'd take it down and it would just start to do this and then bang again. So we left it standing upright. I mean, you can see in the video over there at the talking point. There's a film of it being lowered down and then being put on its side. So I reinforced it lots and lots, and we had a huge team of people, and we took it down and put it on its side, and we had so much material in it, and we got pieces across the middle of it to hold it in. We'd done everything we could, and it just kind of went. And I went, whoa. And I was ready to take it apart and just say, okay, we've got to start again. When Tom said, let's turn it the whole way around, so let's put it, and then we did that and started to remove the material, and actually it was completely fine. But it was a very interesting process and very challenging. And the thing about working with this wood is that it's machined, it's engineered, it's in theory really uniform, but running up to every finger joint is some really bad grain that's just gone into a knot. So it hasn't snapped on the finger joint, but it's snapped either side of it. So it's actually really unpredictable and unknown, but very exciting because it's produced some, really large-scale pieces of work that I don't know that I would be able to do with another natural material or another native natural material. So, so that's the story of the making.